I helped develop
Sorry.
I helped develop the Empathy Circle facilitator training that we've been doing for a little over 2 years. Um, and I'm interested in this project because I think that defining what we mean when we say empathy for the work that we're doing is important because there are so many different things that people could think or uh, ideas they could have about it. So being clear about what we mean, I think, is a good idea. Um, and I think to the degree that uh, doing this kind of empathy defining project helps us increase our legitimacy within academia, I think that's a good thing because it's so nice, particularly in today's culture. It's nice to have an academic support. And the other thing I'll report is I met with Crystal uh, this week, and we had a nice conversation, got to know each other, and then Crystal did some work, and so we're beginning to move forward on the blocks on the blocks to empathy. Although we had some question about whether it should be called blocks to empathy. So um, yeah, but and actually a very good insight came out of the our discussion, which I hadn't had before, which is that um, there's an internal set of blocks that happen. So mostly I've been thinking in terms of blocks, things that the listener does that isn't empathic reflection. That's something else that Edwin is calling a block to empathy. But there's also what goes on inside the listener, and those are blocks also. And that isn't something I've really talked about before in the empathy circle. Well, I have a little bit, but there's no explicit component about trying to teach about that. So I think it's something to think about.
And what's alive for you?
Oh, um, I'm just happy to be here, and I think the other thing's alive is I'm about 8 weeks into being off of sugar and eating more mindfully and exercising regularly, like between an hour and 2 hours a day. And my body, like I'm completely transformed physically. I feel really different. So, and that feels really good. I've dropped about 16 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have to learn to do that too.
Well, if you get on a good trend, the like the physical feedback is really nice. Yeah.
Thanks, DJ. And just mentioning we are recording. I hit the record button, so yeah.
Okay, so I really like this group. I've really enjoyed it, and I think about it a lot. And I should just be transparent and say that Crystal and I have developed a very close relationship out of the empathy circles, and our bond is very special.
Mm.
And I attribute that partly to the empathy circles and partly to who we are as individuals. And Crystal and I met with Graham again this week.
Mm.
And it was very interesting how he perceives all of this. And I have been doing some research. And what's alive for me today is that the research that I'm looking into with empathy has to do with democracy, the relationship with empathy and democracy, and the relationship of empathy with the environmental issues. They're actually calling it empathy conservation. I'm very interested in that relationship. How that relates to academia, I don't know, because we have popular culture and we have academia. And sometimes they're not the same. And sometimes they're not really hearing the pulse of each other. And so I'm hoping that I can contribute sort of that marriage between academia and popular culture here. So that's it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Colin.
Yes, I I'm a relative newcomer to empathy circles. I completed the facilitation course just a couple of weeks ago. I found out about it through Priyanka. Myself and Priyanka were on a facilitation course for the work that reconnects. That was earlier this year, and we've kept in contact ever since then. So she told me about this thing called empathy circles, and I was just curious and came along. My background is varied, but in the last 2 years, I've really invested a lot in my personal growth and self-development, and central to that was emotional intelligence. So I've been training with an organization called 6 Seconds in California, and I'm a coach, an assessor, and a practitioner of emotional intelligence. And obviously, empathy is an important component of that. So I see the importance of this work to me as an EQ coach, but just to me as being a better human being. I also have completed a course in self-compassion, and so I was naturally drawn to self-empathy as part of this project, which Priyanka is already working on. So we decided we'd pair up on that. There are some ideas that can be translated from Kristen Neff's work potentially to the self-empathy piece. I'm interested in embedding the concept of self-empathy in the circle. What I mean by that is to think of all the occasions where self-empathy could be practiced in the context of empathic listening. And I've come up with a list that that maybe I can share partly with you today. A list of ideas. Yes. I'm also, what's alive for me today, I was just on a call with an EQ community that we're in the process of building, and we are going to have our first empathy circle in the next week, at the end of the month. So there's someone else in the community who's also done the facilitation training, and so we're going to offer that and to the community and see how it goes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Thanks, Violetta.
My name is Violetta. Am I the only one with an accent? I'm Miss Priyanka right now. I live in Illinois, but I'm from Bulgaria, Southeastern Europe. My interest in empathy is started more from the clinical side in my thesis, and then transitioned more on the academic side, the neuroscience side for my dissertation. So I'm kind of oscillating between clinical and academic worlds. I love them both. I definitely think of empathy more in this kind of wider, more of way of being type of way. The reason I'm in the project, I think, is similar to DJ. I'm hoping to kind of make that connection between a wider audience and academia. I don't see those as very divorced or very different from one another. Sometimes they are, and the ivory towers are a thing, unfortunately. But I'm very passionate about open science and about pursuing truth about humanity in a way that's open to everyone. So I met Edwin, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I was part of the second empathy circle. So it was not very structured. I don't think Lou was there. Maybe, I don't remember. It was some time ago. Yeah, so when Edwin talked about defining empathy, that was kind of the major enterprise that I undertook in my dissertation and some publications later. What on earth is empathy? And I've been kind of trying to troll as an empathy fan around under Bloom's publications and other kind of public statements against empathy. I do believe empathy has a lot a lot of value, obviously, being here. And I'm enjoying this group quite a bit. Looking forward to getting to know people better. What's alive for me is Edwin sent me a video yesterday, so I've been thinking a lot about imaginative empathy, which is the part that I've said I want to work on. And I'm just wondering if imaginative empathy will be too much of a rabbit trail for this training, whether I could take on another portion of empathy and leave imaginative empathy aside because it's kind of controversial, maybe, I don't know, controversial, but it's not very well and widely established. Those are my thoughts coming today. And obviously we could talk about them in the future. And there's still some other sessions that are not developed, so I definitely could see myself in the relational aspect as well, because of how I see empathy as an intersubjective phenomenon, as opposed to just a skill that one human being has and another one doesn't. So it's more the phenomenological approach that I think DJ mentioned last time we talked. So yeah, that's where I am today.
Okay, thanks, Violetta. Crystal?
Yeah. Just want to take a deep breath. And I did that intentionally because I truly, as I listen to each of you speak, what I hear is this underlying theme of why I joined the empathy movement. And that's that it's about being your whole self and coming to this presence in front of people that you don't know, and your mind, body, spirit, leading with Lou, who's beautifully exercising and becoming his best self. And certainly Colin in coaching, and DJ, and the understanding of empathy. And so for me, and certainly Violetta as well, and the academic side, and both of you, and bridging that. And so for me, that's what empathy was. Empathy was a bridge for me to survive. Empathy as a child was for me a way to see the humanity in an oppressive situation and to connect with that person, and so that I could understand how to best endure that situation. And so while I'm being personal here, that's why I'm here. Empathy is what kept me alive. And I agree with Edwin that we can all benefit from empathy. And as individuals, certainly as families and as communities and as a society, and hopefully move into a collective empathy movement, which is what I see the potential for this to be. And what's alive for me today is I spoke with Bill yesterday about the challenges for my own son in receiving empathy from his peers in the school setting, and how we can transition this at scale for children who might be afraid to show their image and their name, and how we could create an environment in a little community called Gathertown that we're building in the Masters of Scale community with some members, where children could come and practice empathy in a circle without having to share their name and their face. And the power of that then maybe creating a movement where children become more open to the process.
Thanks, Crystal. So for me, let's see what's alive for me. This project is really alive for me. It's what I'm really putting my energies into, and feel pretty excited about it. I just see it taking shape. I've been working something like 14 years on the topic of empathy, and I always like to really understand things really well before I kind of consolidate things, and so I feel like 14 years is time to really get the definition down now. So I'm pretty excited about this, and so just really grateful for everyone's participation, and really enjoy kind of being here with you all. So let's see that
Can I
I
make a
have.
comment
Yep.
before we go on? I just wanted to say to Violetta that so I'm interested in imaginative empathy because I have a theater background and I love role playing, and so the idea of that's what actors do is put themselves in the experience experience of someone else. So I don't know anything about the academic definition of um, imaginative empathy, but I'd be interested in having a conversation with you about it and see where that goes. If you're feeling, because I sense from what you said that you're feeling like maybe you feel kind of alone in working on it or uncertain about working on it. And so I'd love to understand more about it, like whatever there is to understand from an academic point of view, and to just talk with you about it.
Thank you, Lou. I love the theater background. I have a psychodrama background, so it's fun. Part of my research came that people that have theater experience do have higher empathy, and it was I didn't know what to do with it, so that's how I ended up with imaginative empathy.
Mm.
It's just making sense, and it's making more and more sense. I don't have any trouble working by myself. Also, I would love somebody to join.
Mm-hmm.
What Edwin and I were exchanging is that there's this conversation, what is empathy, and that imagination and empathy are not the same things. I disagree, but I wonder how many fights are we willing to pick with that training, with this particular defining empathy, and whether it's willing to go into that particular conversation. I appreciate conflicts. I enjoy it. I'm gonna admit, but I just don't know if it's worth this to use this particular endeavor to necessarily go through the imaginative component. I'm ready to do it, but I've been having thoughts about whether that's worthwhile. So, but that's definitely up for discussion. And but thank you for it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing it. I think the imaginative empathy is an important component, and
Okay.
so yeah, I'm totally, I think it's central. But I thought I'd do, we can maybe do that discussion in an empathy circle format. Let me just give you, this is what the agenda that I was looking at for today. So it was to review the Defining Empathy website, just so you know where everything is. So we have a basic structure for all the, and then review this notes page, just how do you get to this page easily. And then the meeting plan for a 7-week, going through the first iteration of the training. And I've got an outline that we can review and then go into an empathy circle to discuss it. And so maybe I'll just start with the Defining Empathy website, so you know how to get to the different material. So if you go to definingempathy.com, you come to this our project. I mean to the whole project website, and under way of being is the definition of empathy as a way of being and the different components. So there's an explanation there. There's the blocks to empathy, and so putting all kinds of reference material there about the different blocks. And you can just go through that, and you can check that out. Good to have a discussion if the blocks. I've seen the word roadblocks. There's different terms for that. The workshop page link is the sort of the overview of the workshop, the outline with links to different sections. So the kind of description, what is the activity, and then a slideshow to create a slideshow for kind of each section. Then there's the models. Since the last session is comparing other models. So there's a page here for different models that are out there, there's, like the affective cognitive model, the compassion model, and there's all kinds of different. I was just sent the video to Violetta, Dan Havi. It's actually AI at the end. He had another model. So he's coming from the phenomenology, I can't even pronounce that word, viewpoint. So, and the other here is just to keep track of all what we're doing. If you go to, it's all under developmental, the development, and you can click on the meetings. And this is there's a page for each meeting. So our last meeting was the 9th last week. So you can go in and you click on that, and let's see. This is, there's a page, the video. I just embed the video. There's a link to the notes page, and then I've got this service Otter AI. I just drop the video into Otter, and it just transcribes the whole thing. And so you always have kind of that reference material. So this is just, so you can sort of keep track of the meetings. And then our next meeting is, let's see, we have, this is probably a lot to look at. There's a lot of screen stuff, but you don't have to remember it all right now, but we'll kind of go over it a few times. So if we go to the 16th, which is today, bring up this page. And this is a Google website. So these are free websites that are easy to create. And you can embed, it's a great tool for creating, like simple websites. And I created for every meeting, I created a Google Doc, for the agenda. And you just embed it into the website. So you can read it here, but if you want to open it, you just click here on this, and that kind of opens the website. Opens the Google Doc so that's today's meeting agenda. We can just see who came, who is attending. I make a note, and then we have the agenda there. So there'll be like that for every session, just so that we can, all the stuff that we do, we have a documentation. You can go back and check, and I'll see what we've covered. So that's kind of the overview of the website. If you scroll down, this was what I was kind of imagining for the next 8 weeks, counting this week. Is today we just this is, yeah, so it'd be, this is an older version, sorry, so it's actually a week. So this would be starting next week somewhere. Sorry, I got this messed up here. So this is just going back to our landing page. I think this is the current schedule here. 1 minute. Yeah, here we go. So the 16th is today. We review and discuss this schedule. So I want to hear what you think about this schedule. And then maybe do an empathy circle again, like we did last week. How might we develop the training, and how do you define empathy, and how does your definition map onto the empathy circle? So next week I would have that presentation done, a video which I'll send out, which is sort of an overview of lesson 1. And then I'll try to send that out to give you several days so you can view it before we have the session 1. So we'd actually go through each session and discuss it. Session 2 is other-oriented empathy, which is basically the Rogers definition of empathy. And then we can have some activities, or even just to get the ball rolling, to just have an empathy circle on the topic. Then on October 7th, it would be Priyanka and Colin having some sort of presentation and activities on self-empathy, imaginative, and I can help with each of these because I'm kind of working on this full time, so I can also work with all the different teams. And then October 14th would be session 4, Imaginative Empathy. And we have the relational. I think, DJ, you'd mentioned you were interested in that. But so then we have the blocks to empathy. Sounds like, Lou, you have kind of agreed to take that on. And then other models of empathy. And then once that, we go through one iteration. So the first iteration and then starts on the second, would start a second iteration. And the idea is that we just go through the training and then do it at a simple level. Even if we don't have a full outline for it, we can start with an empathy circle on that topic, and then it'll kind of get fleshed out as we go along. So maybe just, I don't know, maybe just hear from everyone kind of how that sounds. Or anybody want to go first, if that made sense? I know there's a lot of stuff to look at, might be kind of confusing, but to me it's very clear. I don't know, Lou, do you want to start? You're muted. You're muted. You're still.
Looks great. A lot of work there. So I'm appreciating that and grateful for that. I think some universities should give you an honorary PhD
Couple of them
for the work that you have done. Yeah, so I appreciate your can't think of the right adjective. Yeah, your willingness to stay so organized, to organize everything. Yeah, thanks for that.
And does that seem like, it's taking a commitment for it's like counting today, it's 8 weeks. So it's like an 8-week cycle, to go through that, and that you would do the blocks to empathy. Does that?
Yeah, yes, and I think I think at least one of those upcoming Fridays I'm probably not going to be able to make it because I have a training that I'm leading that goes Wednesday through Sunday. But yeah, it seems like a reasonable plan to me. And yes, I will continue to work on the blocks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, or whatever you rename it to.
Yeah.
So DJ, any thoughts on that, and you feel like you could commit to that?
I think it looks good. I think it looks really good. I like this idea of running through the whole 7 parts and then running through the whole 7 parts again. I love that. I'm a process person. I love process, and I love the speed of this process. I really do. I think maybe not everybody loves the speed as much as I do, but I just love it because really I'm a very slow thinker. It takes me a very, very, very long time to say, this is what I think. And so you're giving me that time, and I really appreciate that.
Okay, and let's see, Colin, you mentioned dedication. I don't know if that was the word that Lou was searching for.
Right, that was my suggestion. Yes. I appreciate the structure that you're giving to it all. Yeah, it takes the pressure off the rest of us we don't need to worry about both things. I'm just looking at my notepad. I've taken a note of the October 7th as the session on self-empathy. So it's good to have some kind of a deadline to work towards. So I'll be contacting Bianca and working together with her on that. Yeah, I'm also a slow processor, so I'm glad that things are going slow. And I'm also glad that we're not doing the full 2-hour session as an empathy circle, although I am looking forward to the empathy circle part as well, but it's good to have this mix.
Okay, Violetta?
Definitely committed. I'm excited. Thank you, Edwin, for the dedication, and Colin for the word, and just leading us. I'm probably the only person that thinks this is going too fast, but I do like fast thinking, but I think some of this process takes a lot of creativity, getting to know one another. So I'm thinking probably we will need that second cycle of going through the sessions again once we have a little better picture, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it as we do one iteration, then we do another one and another one, so you can be as involved, people, and it'll be turned into the class too. Eventually just bring new people in, like maybe the 3rd round or so.
3rd round, okay.
I imagine, yeah. So, Crystal?
Yeah, building on what everyone shared, I see just the pure dedication, Edwin, that you've dedicated your life to this work. And I agree with Violetta in terms of the PhD. That being said, um, I do think that the 8 sessions are a lot. It's a huge commitment for people. I do see the possibility of merging the imaginative with the relational. And I'm curious if other people are receptive to that. And also building on what Lou shared, the possibility of, I think blockers is a negative word. I like the word bridges to empathy, um, to spin that, and really how we can marry the academia side with words that empower people rather than do raise negative thoughts. And so I'm excited to be here and looking forward to this whole process. Yeah.
Okay, so that was basically what I had for, kind of the framework of what we're doing. I'm working on that video of lesson 1, which will outline, kind of give a kind of a visual overview of the course. It's the first sort of introduction, and it's been taking a lot longer than I thought. So I hope to have that in several days. I'll have that done. But for next steps, I thought of just doing an empathy circle to raise any thoughts. We have about an hour and a half. Maybe go for about an hour and 15 minutes with a 15-minute closing. Does that sound good? Okay, well, we'll just open it up. Somebody want to keep time, 5-minute turns, and we got a clock.
I can do that.
Okay, and whoever wants to start, select your listener.
Start. Crystal, would you mind being my listener?
Yes, thank you.
And I'll mention that page there. You can take notes too. The link was in the chat, so that's.
My thoughts are in all kinds of directions. The first one, I think I really liked your expression, Crystal, about making that a place where academic conversations would empower people. I really like this idea. It kind of, I think, fits a lot of how I approach the overall project. That, the meaning of academia is to bring power by bringing people closer to a more truthful understanding. So maybe I'll stop here.
Yeah, so you're sharing how you value that concept of academia empowering people.
Mm-hmm. This concept really resonated with me, and I think I'll borrow it from you for kind of in a long-term fashion. Just on a practical side, I'm not sure what to do with imaginative empathy. Maybe I'll just share a little bit of the conversation we've had back and forth with Edwin. But you heard a little bit of how I ended up with imaginative empathy. I'll put a little more context into it. I thought I will explore adults and their levels of empathy, and we'll compare that to the parenting they received in the first 18 years of life. And I was pretty confident that I'm going to come out of it proving that this one particular approach to parenting brings up people, raises people that are more empathetic.
So you're sharing how in your work that you are researching how empathy and parenting are correlated, and you're confident of your hypothesis. And that is your vision also for imaginative empathy that you have shared.
That's something I did 5 years ago for my dissertation. I was wrong. Those two did not correlate, and I had to find a way to explain my results.
You're sharing how you were wrong and the two did not correlate, and now you're pressing forward.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Part of that conversation and kind of analysis led me to Zahavi's idea of lower and higher empathy, because the only thing that I had for sure is that people who did theater were more empathetic than others. Everything else that I was exploring did not bring any meaningful connection that I could analyze.
Yeah, and you're sharing how in acting, certainly the actors have empathy, they're demonstrating it, and how that role modeling is something that you're curious about.
My hypothesis, going back to literature and reading a little wider the second time around, was that somewhere in our early adult years, we're making choices that seem to be taking us on that more empathetic route or less empathetic route. And imagination was one of the guesses that I've stayed with for the last 5 years.
Yeah, and how imagination is that intersection of how children may or may not learn the skill of empathy.
Rather adults. In children, it's very clear there was a lot of evidence that children's empathy is correlated to the way they're parented. But something happens in adulthood where that continuity is not there anymore.
Yeah, so you were actually speaking about children and how in adults, sometimes there is a lack of continuity.
In
And
other words, empathetic children do not grow up to be empathetic adults necessarily.
and how empathetic children do not grow up to be empathetic adults.
Sometimes it
Right.
grows. Okay. Thank you. I feel heard, Crystal.
Lou, would you be my listener?
Yeah.
Imaginative empathy is reminds me of C.S. Lewis and books that I read as a child, where I would escape to another world, and certainly building on Violetta's suggestion, I see the parallels with acting.
Yeah. So when you think about imaginative empathy, what comes up for you is remembering the books that you read as a child and being able to escape into them. And you see the kind of connection between that and theater and acting.
And it's so funny how the universe works, because I was just thinking of this morning in terms of how actors are appearing to be empathetic, and that how there is a small population, 10%, of people who have a head injury and who really don't have the capacity to be empathetic.
Yeah. So you were acknowledging some kind of synchronicity when you talk about the universe. So there's some kind of synchronicity, I guess, maybe in this coming up because um, you're aware. Well, I'm missing this middle piece. So the last thing you said was you're aware that there are people who have head injuries. About 10% of people that have head injuries wind up as a result of that having no empathic capacity. So that was the last point you made, but there was a point in the middle there that I dropped. Sorry.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it reminded me of my daughter when we were in Boston, and how she was I was trying to integrate her into a new area. And as part of their acting class, they had to write their own personal story of a feeling and how they were, where they were, like as Edwin does beautifully, where we are in this moment. And then they trade stories and act them out.
Yeah, so you're remembering a time when you were in Boston and you were trying to help your daughter integrate into, I guess, that area of life. And she was in an acting class, or maybe you were in an acting class, where she was in an acting class, where as an exercise, they were writing down an experience that they had, including all the feelings of it, and then they would exchange that with another person, and then each person would act out the other person's situation.
And it was so funny because Bella has been through some transitions in our home life and moving, and everyone wanted her script.
Hmm. Yeah, so you're saying your daughter has been through a lot. She's had a lot of stuff happen in her life, and that whatever she wrote about herself, everyone else was very interested in it. They all wanted to do her script.
It was like a bidding war of like who gets what scripts, and it helped her see the lesson in life experiences. And I think the same is true with imaginative empathy and the potential of using this for children who could come together and act out other experiences, but also for adults.
Yeah, so you're saying the other kids really resonated with what she shared, and that makes you think that that process of sharing our experiences and having other people take those on in an imaginative way, you think that has great potential for helping people develop their empathic capacity or understanding each other or something like that.
Yeah, and even talking about this gather town where kids could come in and be someone else and act out what they're feeling in a safe environment.
Yeah, and so that is really the purpose of this thing you were telling us about called um, something town,
Mhm.
where a person can enter it and become someone else and act out with safety, with complete safety.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I see the parallels again between the blocks to empathy being bridges to empathy. They were in my own life, but also with relational and imaginative. And I'd love to explore us all working together on those three pieces and how that would work.
Yeah, so you're thinking about how the blocks to empathy that you're really seeing as bridges to empathy, you see some kind of connection between that and relational empathy and imaginative empathy, and you think it might make sense for those three to be worked on together.
I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So I'll speak to Colin.
Sure.
There you do. Okay, great. Yeah, so I love this topic of imaginative empathy. Um, so listening to some of the things that were said, I'm reminded as an actor. So there's a technique in acting called substitution, where if you have to play a part where you don't really understand, you've never had the experience that the character has, but there's a certain emotion that is present that you substitute your own experience. So something that made you sad, you bring that into your body and you use that because you can't relate to you don't actually have the experience of what the character is going through. So I'll stop there.
Right. So you're interested in imaginative empathy, and you're talking about your experience as an actor, and this model in acting or process in acting called substitution, where the person may not have a direct experience of what they're required to act, but they can maybe recall an emotion that can be applied to that situation.
From their own experience, yeah. So they're substituting your own experience for what the character is going through. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that empathy? I actually do think that is part of what happens with empathy. So, I'm listening to someone, they've gone through an experience, they're having some feelings about it, it's very sad. I may not have gone through that at all, but I have gone through other things that make me sad, and I can certainly sense their sadness. And I can let myself feel that, even though it's not sadness maybe for the same thing that they are feeling it for. Uh, and I do think that the person experiences my being with them. Yeah, I'll stop there.
And so you start off by asking yourself whether that was empathy or not, and again, talking about how we look at our past experiences. You use the example of sadness, and we then try and put ourselves in the position of the other person who's experiencing the sadness based on our experience of sadness, and let ourselves feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, because the experiences may not be the same, but the emotions are the same. The feelings, it's a similar feeling. And I think, what I understand about mirror neurons is that, when another person is experiencing certain feelings or whatever, things are activated in my brain, and that's part of empathy. And it's more, I mean, they say this about kids, certainly for parents, that kids will not remember the content, they remember the emotions. So parents who are trying to make a certain point, they feel so strongly about it that they're trying to do something with their kids, and like the kids won't remember what you were talking about. All they'll remember is the feelings. And and uh, yeah, I'll stop there.
So you shared your thoughts with us and the neuroscience behind empathy and this concept of mirror neurons, that where we unconsciously reflect or experience the emotions of the other person, even though they're our emotions. And then you talked about how children, they don't remember the content of what is being said, they remember more the feeling or the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually hearing you reflect that back, it's not that they don't remember the content at all. They probably do, but the feelings are much stronger. And actually, that happens for adults too. You talk about an adult who's in a very upsetting conversation, they'll say, "Well, I don't remember what he said. I just remember he was attacking me," or, yeah. So they remember the feelings and the meaning that they were making of it.
Right. And yeah, so you just started off by correcting me and saying that adults, yeah, children also get the content, but it's the feelings that they remember more. And it's also similar for adults. We have to remember the feeling of the experience rather than more than the content. Yes. But
Yeah, thanks. You
is that
got it.
everything?
Yes. The only thing I'll say is I wasn't correcting you. I was correcting myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So thanks. Yeah, I feel very heard. Thank you.
I would like to ask DJ to be an active listener.
Thank you. Yes,
Right.
Colin.
Thank you, DJ. I was just thinking about the imaginative empathy, and one of the early definitions from Carl Rogers in his Way of Being paper. And what stuck out for me is that being empathic is, if I just can paraphrase it very into a few sentences, it's to perceive, the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy, as if one were the person. And this piece, as if, is really important.
Okay, you've been thinking about imaginative empathy, and you're going back to the definition of Carl Rogers and the way that he defined the way of being or the ideas of empathy. And you're paraphrasing it. But empathy is sort of the imagining of what someone else is feeling. I think I kind of lost that a little bit there at the end.
That's fine. Everything you said was fine. What I was emphasizing is that there's a quality of as if that's really important. And the reason that's important is that otherwise one is over-identifying with the person.
Okay, yeah. So you were emphasizing the as if in the definition by Rogers. So you're imagining as if you were feeling what the other person is feeling, but you really don't know. And if you don't have that as if as a qualifier, you really get into this over-identifying concept.
Right. And when I think of the words as if, I see the link between that and imagination, because it has this conditional quality to it. And on the over-identification, I would say that in such a case, a person cannot really be present for the other person if they're identifying too strongly. And so this quality of as if is really important, and it could be something that could be explored as part of the imaginative empathy piece.
Okay, so you're going more deeply into this idea of the as if as a qualifier, and you see it as helping one stay present in the imaginative empathy relationship with the other. And if one didn't have that qualifier and they were more into the over conditioning or over being, or like kind of trying to go inside the other person maybe, or something, that kind of takes away the presence. You can't really be present and be overemphasizing or over conditioning. Probably don't have that right.
That was fine, DJ. The word over-identifying is the one that I was using. When you over-identify, then you lose that quality of as if. Yeah, I'd maybe like to just talk briefly in the remaining time about self-empathy and what I've been taking a look at. I'm interested in the opportunities to practice self-empathy in an empathy circle context. I'll start there.
Okay, so you reminded me that you were talking about over-identifying, that it can be problematic. And so you want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about self-empathy and what you've been thinking about that and the role that it plays in the empathy circles.
Right. And so I'm interested in like the practical aspect of it, the opportunities to practice self-empathy from the perspective of the speaker, from the perspective of the active listener and the passive listener, and also the facilitator. And I would like to share some of that maybe in the next round.
So you're exploring the defining of self-empathy from all the different perspectives of the people in the empathy circles, including the facilitator.
Right. Yes, in a practical way. I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Edwin, will you be my listener?
Listening.
Well, I think I'm going to just share an experience that I had this week. And then how it relates to defining relational empathy.
So you want to
So-
share an experience that you have and it relates to relational empathy?
Yes. And so I had organized a meeting with a member of Congress, and this member of Congress is in Florida, but I don't live in that district. And I invited a lot of people. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're had set up a meeting with a congressional representative in Florida, and you're not in their district, and it sounds like you brought a lot of people, invited a lot of people to this event.
Yeah, and it turned out to be pretty awesome. And I think one of the reasons why is because I've been working on this defining of relational empathy. And I just wanted to experiment with it. I had 24 people there on Zoom, plus 2 staff members from the representative.
Yeah, so it just was a really great experience. And you're thinking it has to do with you're working on this project on empathy, relational empathy, and just you had 2 staff members and 24 participants, I think you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was the facilitator of this exchange, and at the end, when it was all over and we did the debriefing without the representatives, people were just astounded at how great it was.
So you just got really great feedback from the participants in the debrief. It's astounded. There was just very great feedback.
They even use words like magical, transformational, and they wanted to kind of adopt some kind of structure to make this happen again.
Yeah, so the feedback was just using really strong words like magical, transformational. Let's do it again.
Yeah, of course, it's not that easy. It's like if you were to ask me, how did you do that? Like, not 100% sure. And that's sort of the caveat here for me. Okay. Because relational empathy is a very real thing to me. It's a very lived experience for me. But defining it here with this group is new, right?
Yeah, so defining it sounds like you're just hard to sort of define it, and this is a new experience to try to really explain it and define it.
Right, and I'm not sure it can really be defined in an appropriate way. But for me, if I had to pick like 3 words that it means something to me based on this lived experience that I just had where it was really successful, I would say the first word would be connection.
Yeah, so the first part of the relational empathy is just the value of connection or the quality of connection.
Yes, the magic of connection.
Yeah, magic of connection.
And I'm not sure how to define that. But if we move on, I kind of have questions about, well, what's the second and third kind of defining concept? And I really am interested in action. So I'm trying to figure out how relational empathy translate into action and questioning whether it even does.
So you're looking at what are the components of relational empathy. You have one, it's connection. You think that there's more. You're wondering what the other ones are. And how does all that relate to action? Because that quality of action is something that you value, is important to you.
It's very important to me. My whole life, it's always been the question about action. As I mentioned last week, my question every day is, why is there so much suffering? So my goal is to come up with some way to have relational empathy defined in a way that leads to the end of suffering, or at least the reduction of suffering.
Yeah, so your real goal is, or what real concern of yours is just that there's the suffering in the world, and you're wanting this relational empathy to lead towards the reduction of suffering in the world. And it's like a lifelong goal of yours.
Mm-hmm. So this is very central to my being, this process. And so I'm very grateful, but I'm not really sure if I'm allowed to be grateful. Like, what am I really supposed to be feeling and doing now?
Yeah, so you don't know. You're feeling really grateful. You don't know if you're allowed to feel grateful. What am I supposed to be doing here? It's like, can I be grateful?
Thank you, Edwin. I feel fully heard.
Okay. I'll speak to Violetta.
Yes, Edwin.
Yeah, in terms of what can I, am I allowed to feel grateful? All feelings, everything is welcome in the empathy circle. I say it over and over again. It's about free speech, free feelings. So it's gratitude, anger, you name it. It's all welcome. Yeah.
You're thinking about DJ's thoughts on, am I allowed to be grateful? When you're saying in an empathy circle, every feeling is welcome, from gratitude to anger to, it's free speech. I remember free speech, free space,
Free feelings.
free feelings. Okay.
Two, free speech and free feelings. I'm gonna bring the feeling component into it.
Yes, it's a place where you could bring whatever you have, whatever your experiences are.
Yeah, and the other thing, I had a list here, talk about the imaginative empathy. And I was kind of like wondering, like you were really into imaginative empathy, and suddenly I'm seeing some kind of a little concern that you're feeling concerned about that. I'm sort of wondering what happened. And so I'm just kind of have some curiosity about like what happened. I imagine it might have been seeing the Dan Zahavi video or something.
You're now thinking of me, and my hesitation now to go into imaginative empathy when I'm passionate about it, and you're wondering if that has anything to do with the video you sent, Zahavi's video yesterday.
Yeah, so Dan Zahavi is a big phenomenologist, and that's sort of the direction I think you're following. And here's this guy saying, "Hey, this imaginative empathy, this imagination is not empathy." So you're probably feeling a little confused right now. It's kind of what I'm imagining.
You're trying to imagine what I'm imagining about imagination and empathy. Because I'm so rooted in phenomenology and Roger's role in how I see empathy and how, what propels me in this project. You're like, well, this major voice in phenomenology today is saying imagination is not empathy, and maybe I'm confused. Maybe there's confusion for me.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's an important component. It's a fun component. And in the definitions of empathy, it's usually put under the heading of cognitive empathy. And there's different components, perspective taking, role taking, imagine others. So there's a whole series of fantasy sort of terms that relate to imagination that comes under this heading of cognitive empathy.
So you're arguing with Zahavi right now. Zahavi, it is empathy. It's usually seen more as the cognitive, in the affective cognitive model, is as a cognitive phenomenon, along with perspective taking, a model of the other, model of self.
Yeah, I'm arguing with Zahavi. Zahavi, you got it wrong here. And I've talked to him. I've interviewed him not 9 or 10 years ago. I did an interview with him. So we can follow up with him on this topic.
You're arguing with this phenomenologist Zahavi, and you're saying, we had an interview before, and we can have another interview and kind of clarify further imagination.
Yeah, and in terms of how to do it in the empathy circle, that's what I wanted to mention, that when we're talking about these different aspects, to try to ground it in the empathy circle. Like Colin was saying, this is what are the roles of self-empathy, within the different roles. So within imaginative empathy, it's like I can see exercises doing role playing. So we all take on a role of being someone else, and then we have an empathy circle with each other, right?
So you're talking about how the imaginative empathy could happen in the empathy circle, a little bit like what Colin was talking about, self-empathy. How do we embody whatever that slideshow talks about? How do we actually make it happen in the empathy circle? So, for example, one option would be we take on some roles and then we come back to the empathy circle and we talk about how that felt.
Yeah, like I've told this story that someone in the empathy circle had the problem, an issue with their creativity. They'd be creative, and they had another part of themselves was judgmental of their creativity, and then they'd feel pain about it. And then they said, I don't want any creativity because it's so painful. So we actually set up a scenario in the circle where one person played their creativity, somebody else played their judgment, and somebody else played their pain. And then the components, their internal components, had a dialogue with each other using empathic listening. So we're doing imaginative empathy plus reflective, sort of other oriented empathy. So it's kind of layering these different components of empathy. So that's just like an activity we could do.
Yeah, you were talking about a specific activity where the different roles might not be people, but experiences, feelings that could play out, and then we could, as we talk about that afterwards, we could root it also in relational empathy and have different layers. And this time, Lou remembered to turn on the time for Edwin, so.
So my time is up. I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Lou, would you mind listening to me?
Yes. Be glad.
You would mind? Okay. Yeah, it goes a little theoretical here. I'm hoping it will make sense. I do see myself in the phenomenological perspective, and that's what brought me to Rogers, and that's what kept me rooted in Rogers.
Yeah, so you are just wanting to clarify that you do see yourself as being in the phenomenological area, and that exploring that is what brought you to Rogers, and so you see yourself as aligned with those two perspectives.
The reason why I was wondering about imaginative empathy, to respond to Edwin, but also to kind of share with everybody and whoever is watching the recording, is my thought is a little bit along the lines of the definition of empathy. I wonder if the definition of imagination might vary from a person to person.
Yeah, so the question that kind of got raised for you around imaginative empathy is whether there's too much difference in the different ways that people might define imagination, and that might complicate things.
Yes, so that's one definition of imagination is what Edwin was talking about, being it more cognitive, perspective taking, role taking. But another version of imagination where I find that it kind of rings true for me, and in my explorations have brought me to, is that imagination is a very embodied experience. That as I'm imagining a little bit what you were talking about earlier, is I'm imagining how somebody feels in a situation I've never been in. Some parts of my body, not just the premotor neurons, but the muscles that participate in that kind of experience will react, or the premotor neurons that would have triggered that motor scheme would produce it. So if somebody's scared, I would feel like I'm getting smaller and hiding. So for me, imagination is this kind of embodied experience.
Yeah, so you're saying that the two different kind of branches of thinking about imagination or defining imagination. One's more cognitive, which is like perspective taking or role taking, and the other is more embodied, which is how is my physiology responding to what I'm imagining. And so those are two different tracks.
And I'm just not sure if if it's worth picking up that conversation as well in this format.
Yes, and so you're wondering whether, like for the purposes of this course, whether trying to deal with both of those pieces is too much.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay. So I'll speak to DJ. Yeah, so this is a great conversation. I love this. Um, and so I don't see cognitive and embodied as separate. I see them as two aspects of how a person might respond to something or might be imagining. So it's kind of like the difference between just like getting an intellectual understanding of what someone's saying and actually feeling what they're saying. So part of it is up here and part of it is here in my heart. And yes, I'll stop there.
Okay, so you're loving this conversation and you're really liking it. And you don't see a separation between the cognitive aspects of empathy and the imagining parts of empathy. And that you see it kind of simultaneous, maybe, where you have the head and the heart coming together.
Yeah, and hearing you reflect that to me, I'm realizing that there are two parts. I'm not saying there aren't two parts. There are. I'm just saying that both of them can operate together. I mean, I think really being present means having both of them. So I can imagine actually being only in my head and understanding intellectually, but not being moved at all emotionally, and that kind of presence to a person is a certain level of empathy, but not totally satisfying. And someone who's just emotionally responding to a person, like a person's talking to me and I'm having a giant emotional reaction and I have no cognitive presence, that also would be unsatisfying. Like you might even become concerned about the people. Oh, they're having a bigger reaction than I am to it. Kind of what Colin was saying about identifying too much. I'll stop there.
Okay, so you ended that with that over-identification could be just feeling it, like maybe in the heart space, or you kind of like gestured towards your heart space. And that might just be like over the top. That would be too much. So it's really both. You know, you have to have the cognitive and the heart space working together, and kind of maybe connecting like inside the individual, the human, the one human, and then how does that come out to the other human, and there's some kind of way that that's perceived as a whole, as more empathetic or more meaningful, perhaps. If it's just the cognitive, it's not whole.
And what's coming up for me now is just kind of thinking about how, the beauty of Western science is like this idea of breaking things apart. And the hazard is that we then say, because we've broken it into pieces, we say it's this piece or this piece, and not both and. And I think it's both. I think it's an and, not an or. Yeah.
So the idea is that Western science loves to break things apart. Like it's this part, not that part. And you see it together. It's an and.
Yeah, and I'm not denigrating Western science. That's a beautiful thing, actually, to analyze and try to break things apart. It's then the duality thinking of putting one thing against another. That kind of duality thinking is we need integrative thinking. Yeah.
So we need integrative thinking. We don't need the duality thinking where it's this or that against this or this compared to that. And you really like the whole idea of Western science, and you just want to take the best of it. And to you, that's an integrative approach.
Yeah, thank you. I feel very heard for that.
Yeah, good.
I wanted to say that, Edwin, what you described about the different parts of self, internal, having a dialogue, there's a process called voice dialogue process that I've learned and been trained in, and we use it in the leadership training that I do. So that's, yeah, that it's, so I've experienced that. I just wanted to say that.
So you're kind of speaking to Edwin about this voice dialogue process that you've used in your own work, and that you feel that it's very, very effective.
Yeah, thanks very much. I feel very heard.
Thank you, Lou.
You're muted, DJ.
Yeah, I was looking right at it. Sorry. I feel compelled to go
Who are
like
you
in two
speaking
separate
to?
directions.
You want to pick someone, DJ?
I'm Crystal. Will you be my listener? I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you.
That's called like telepathic thinking and just thinking you. Okay. So I'm kind of compelled to go in two different directions right now. One is to kind of be in the center of this really nice flow that's going on with Violetta and Lou and you about imaginative empathy. And the other has to do with what I've been thinking about democracy.
So you're sharing that you're feeling conflicted about which direction to go, whether democracy or the beautiful expressions that have been shared about imaginative empathy.
Right. And so imaginative empathy to me is kind of this big unknown, like I've never even heard of it before. I don't really feel I can speak to it intelligently, but I'm listening to what's going on here and I'm hearing that people are talking about it in terms of theater and role playing and how important that has been in the development of Violetta's and Lou's ideas about imaginative empathy.
Yeah, you're acknowledging that this is not an area of expertise for you. And while celebrating Violetta and Lou's history and knowledge of the subject matter of
Yeah,
acting and the
yeah,
role playing and the imaginative empathy.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, and it takes me back to my childhood when I was an actress, and I often say to people that when I was an actress, a child actress, that it saved my life.
Wow. And you're sharing how acting as a child, that process saved your life.
Hmm. And it took me a long time to accept that it didn't become my career, and I often blame my parents for that. And now we're sitting here in this discussion, and I'm thinking, how cool that I can relate to Lou and Violetta because I was a child actress.
Yeah. And as a child actress now, you're looking back, remembering your parents and the role they played, and you're not continuing acting. And yet now the beauty of it coming full circle with Lou and Violetta. Yeah. In your
Yes,
experience. Yeah.
yes. And so it's so nice to think about it in a positive way. So I want to thank you, Lou, and thank you, Violetta, for opening up my mind and my eyes to the idea that that gift actually might be imaginative empathy. And that might have taken my personal empathy that I already had and made it better. And that's why it saved my life.
Yeah. And that beautiful silver lining and the gift of acting and what it meant for you and that process of how that that acting saved your life, that may have been a piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
Yes, and this is new for me. And so I want to get back a little bit, Crystal, to your idea about combining relational and imaginative. And I want to be open to that. And I don't want to have resistance to that.
Yeah, and you're honoring the resistance that you're feeling, and that you don't want to be resistance to the idea of relational and imaginative empathy coming together.
But then I also hear Violetta saying it's a little too much, you know? So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now at this moment. Wow, here I am with relational thinking that's going to process into something like action, like ending suffering, or, I mean, how does that relate to acting? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I think role playing has a role, but I also think that it takes away from the reality of suffering.
Mm. And you're thinking and pondering how the dichotomy really of acting versus empathy, and does it take away from the meaning of empathy?
The potential of empathy, especially when you look at relational empathy. Like, what is the purpose of relational empathy if it's not action? Is the purpose of relational empathy imaginative empathy? And then what is the purpose of imaginative empathy? Is it just for your own happiness? Or does it really translate into a changed or reduction in suffering?
So you're questioning the use of both in terms of the outcome, the action that comes from both, really, and the whole process. Yeah.
Thank you. I feel fully heard, Crystal.
Yeah. Violetta, would you be my listener this time?
With pleasure.
Yeah. I'm currently reading this book for Masters of Scale called CEO Excellence, and I see this playing out for people who are in leadership positions, or on the battlefield at war, and how all of this comes together. Yeah.
So you're thinking how all of this comes together, and you're basing it, kind of drawing connections to a book you're reading on CEO excellence, and how that plays out in people in leadership, maybe on the battlefield as well.
Yeah. And I call it this, I learned from someone in my group, Ubuntu, I am because we are, and I added on to it, all for one and one for all, diverse by design.
Your group has, I think I'm missing something here. Your group has a motto that's all for one and one for all from the Musketeers, and you added the.
That was a lot. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ubuntu is this philosophy of that I am because we are.
Oh,
And
okay.
I added on to it because
Okay.
I had researched around the world a mantra that everyone embraces. There's not many. One of them is all for one and one for all. So I added that. And then I added diverse by design.
Okay, I remember now. You mentioned it in previous circles that you have researched around the world a mantra that everybody embraces, and that's the one. And you just added diverse by design to the
Yeah.
mantra.
And how, when we even look at our sustainable development goals, as DJ was sharing earlier, and CEOs, how we hold them responsible for not walking the talk.
So you're thinking about the sustainable development goals and how CEOs are held accountable for not really doing what they've committed to, not walking the talk.
And yet how on the battlefield of life, we see our military men sacrificing their life. They are truly walking the talk, and empathy to their fellow man, and that no one gets left behind. Yeah.
Then you're connecting that to somebody who does walk the talk. You're thinking of the military men who sacrifice their lives and are empathizing with their fellow men, and how those things connect.
Yeah, and how in the process of all this, we all have an energy that we emit. And I realize the concern over polarizing thinking of positive or negative, but we have a yin and a yang. That is like the elephant in the room. We have a positive and a negative reaction to experiences. So we just have to own that. We do. It's wired in us, in our DNA, in our amygdala, and we have a reaction. And so can we have empathy for that?
So you're suggesting that we should have an empathy to the fact that we do have positive and negative energy. We all emit one or the other. We all have that yin and yang in us, and we react to things
Yeah.
with positively or negatively.
And the power of word and actions being aligned is why I think it's so important to call the positive and negative bridges, because just like in life, we all have what some may consider a positive experience and some may consider a negative. At the end of the day, when you have that place of nirvana, I believe you just accept whatever comes your way.
So you're talking about that kind of end point of nirvana at which you're accepting whatever comes your way, and whether it's considered a positive moment or a negative moment, you're connecting it to the bridges, maybe to empathy. Why you want them to be called more bridges rather than blocks, and how that makes sense when we are trying to look at somebody and say they're walking the talk.
Yeah, and fortunately, most of us don't have to suffer under that oppression that leads us to that place of acceptance. Certainly the people in Ukraine are experiencing it right now, and are the people in Russia. And I see that if you don't face the reality that there is a positive and a negative, that you are then dismissing their experience.
Mm. Not all of us are unfortunate enough to suffer the deep suffering that forces you into that acceptance of positive and negative. If I'll add good and bad, that could lead to negating the suffering of the people of Ukraine and also the ones in Russia.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing, and that's that when you accept the positive and negative and you say they are positive or negative, your energy can neutralize it. It's when you don't associate with the positive or the negative that then you can experience empathy with another human being, because you see it not as a positive or negative reaction in yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'm connecting it to a little bit to what Colin said earlier about self-empathy, that idea that I'm identifying my own reaction as positive or negative, and based on that, I could empathize with the other person as experiencing something positive or something negative.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't think I have my thoughts completely out, but that's on me. So you did a beautiful job, Viola. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We do have maybe one more person. Colin, would you mind listening to me?
Sure.
Okay. I've been thinking about this, how to your question about self-empathy and how that relates to my, I think you talked about it last time, my ability at all to turn towards the other, and how it is dependent on me being able to allow myself to be where I am.
Mm-hmm. So you're just thinking about self-empathy, and to be able to turn towards the other person, you need to know where you are yourself.
Mm-hmm. As Crystal was just talking about acceptance of the parts of my life that could be negative or positive, and how that acceptance would be the pathway to kind of the stepping stone for me to connect to the person that's in front of me.
Okay, so you're talking about acceptance and accepting not just the positive, but also the negative. But that could really help you to connect with the person in front of you.
I guess my thought is more practically about the training, that the self-empathy is the starting point for us to be able to do empathy well, not just at the beginning, but also something to go back to whenever we're struggling to understand what the other human being is really doing, how this source will always be there, where I can look and say, well, what is happening within me that's preventing me from connecting?
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about how self-empathy is a good starting point, but it's also something that we can come back to when we find that we're not able to connect with the other person as well as we'd like. We can come back to ourselves.
Yeah, very, very good. Yeah. Part of me is thinking maybe we could rephrase debrief as those moments of self-empathy, or kind of maybe rename pieces of each session to a self-empathy point of connection to self, or something along those lines. My thoughts are not very clear either, but that's one of my thoughts right
now. So you're talking about renaming to connection with self.
The debrief moments that we've called debrief so far. I wonder if it's not a way to do self-empathy actually.
I remember you saying debrief, but now you're explaining what that is. When we have debrief moments, that we could actually make them moments to practice self-empathy.
Yeah, those were my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. So if I may speak, I will ask Edwin, please.
Listening.
Okay, so I'm thinking about self-empathy and also imaginative empathy, and I'm seeing a connection there. And it's just an exercise that I came across the other day, which Edwin, you put me in, you pointed me in that direction, and that is focusing, Gendlin's focusing.
So you're seeing an exercise for self-empathy and imaginative empathy, and it's a focusing process that you.
I mean, I just wanted to. Right. I just wanted to share it with Violetta and anyone else who might be working on imaginative empathy. There is a link in the shared in the Google Doc, in one of the Google Docs, the shared Google Docs. I watched this YouTube video and then wrote out the steps to follow in this imaginative exercise of self-empathy, and I can share it with you all. I'll post it to the website.
Yeah, so you found that exercise, and you can post it for everyone to see.
Right. It goes through. I've named it the holding infant exercise. I don't know if it has a name, but it's presented by someone called Dr. Kathy McGuire, and it is about. It may be a practical exercise that could be used in one of the sessions. So just wanted to draw attention to that.
Yeah, so there's an exercise that Kathy McGuire did on holding the infant, and you just see that as a sort of a combination of imaginative and self-empathy.
Right. And I have ideas of my own of opportunities to practice self-empathy in the empathy circles, and my motivation here is that I had to practice self-empathy when I was starting out, and I'm still having to practice it. because I'm not always, I can be hard on myself.
So you had to practice self-empathy because it sounds like you're hard on yourself and be judgmental, have self-judgments, and so it sounds like it's very relevant to you.
Mm-hmm. And so, for example, if I was to give one opportunity to practice as the active listener, from an active listener perspective, I can practice self-empathy when I'm unable to reflect back to the speaker as well as I'd like. I can pause and show self-empathy by being open and curious to my feelings and needs in that moment. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so you're describing self-empathy exercise that when you're listening to someone, you feel like you're not listening as well as you could take a pause and really sense into yourself to connect.
Right. And this idea of being open and curious to feelings and needs, and also not to judge myself critically, but instead show myself loving kindness. You know, this concept that comes from compassion, but which is also applicable here for empathy.
Yeah, so instead of judging yourself, you could you do that exercise as well as give yourself loving kindness too.
Mm-hmm. And also remind myself that this could happen to anyone. Just remind myself of our common humanity.
Yeah, so think in terms of it's not just you alone here, but it's like happens to everyone. So there's a common humanity there that you can connect to.
Yeah, and I think there's a real need for self-empathy within the empathy circle context. This is just one example, but I have other examples that I can share also.
So within the context of the empathy circle, there's a real need for self-empathy and there's other examples that you could give too.
I mean, I could give an example, for example, from the facilitator perspective. You know, when I'm confronted by a challenge in the empathy circle that I find difficult to meet, I can choose to practice self-empathy there also.
Yeah, so another example is if you're facilitating and there's a challenge that you can also sort of connect with yourself and have self-empathy to maybe ground yourself or connect with yourself.
I feel fully heard.
Okay, I guess there's maybe time for just one more. I'll keep it shorter. Lou, can I speak to you?
Sure.
I did want to go back to we started with imaginative empathy, and so I did want to go address that again. So this imaginative empathy, cognitive empathy, there's an area.
Yeah, so you're wanting to return to the discussion around imaginative empathy and you see it as there are two pieces: cognitive empathy and imaginative empathy.
Yeah, in the academic world, they're talking about affective empathy and cognitive empathy, and I think they're horrible terms. They're not sexy. They're not fun. They're dry. And it's like, let's get rid of those and let's use terminology that people can get really into. Yeah.
So in the academic world, they are mainly talking about cognitive and affective empathy, and you think that those words people don't relate to them, and they're not they don't attract people, and so you'd like to use different words.
Yeah, so I'm sort of replacing cognitive empathy with imaginative empathy, and I think it's the sexier, funner. It's actually more accurate to what's going on. There's a aspect of accuracy too. Because the imaginative empathy is sort of a whole body experience, right? It's like all parts of your body are involved in imagination. And when you're talking about cognitive, for me, what comes is this, controlled, dry, rigid mental state only. Whereas the imaginative, it just is like very encompassing. So I think it's a much better term.
So you think imaginative empathy is much better term than cognitive empathy, because it's more interesting and it's a sexier word, and it encompasses the fullness of what goes on in both your head and your body when you're doing imaginative empathy.
Yeah, so I would just say to Violetta, let's hang in there with imaginative empathy. I think it's really fun. It'll be just fun with acting and role playing, and we can try do it out in the within the we can do these role plays, like, Colin is saying, oh, I sometimes have self-judgment. Well, let's take those pieces and act them out, for example, in the empathy circle. And it can be very powerful to do that. You had mentioned the voice something activity, Lou. It's very powerful, and it's distinct from just listening to someone as sort of a direct listening.
So you're encouraging Violetta to hang on to imaginative empathy and to keep working in that area, not let go of it, and you think it will be very fun and very rich because there's a lot of stuff that could be done that you think people will enjoy and will learn a lot from.
Yeah, and one of the examples was Colin saying, "Oh, I have self-judgments, and how you do the self-empathy." That I think we can actually use the imagination to role play those different qualities, and that it's a lot of fun. You learn a lot from my experience.
Yeah, so you're giving the example of what Colin said about self-empathy and what happens internally, and you're saying with imaginative empathy we can take that internal process and make it external, and people will learn a lot from that. You've seen people learn a lot from that.
So I'm just hanging in there with imaginative empathy. So just being a little concerned. Oh, Violetta's losing her. But I think we can even talk to the phenomenologist, because it is the different phenomenon to talk about imagination. There's something there. The Dan is just saying he's not considering that empathy, but I think if you look at, I think it is. There's a long discussion there anyway. So hang in there.
Yeah, so you're really wanting to hang on to imaginative empathy and continue to work with it, and you think actually it does fit in the phenomenological area, and and uh, and you are in conversation with other academics about it. Dan is one of them. Yeah, and you think that's going to work.
Yeah. The other thing that's coming to me is about action, empathic action. I mean, that could be a whole topic of its own. But I think that a lot of times listening to people, like in an empathy circle, people say, "Oh, there's no action happening." But I would say that the empathy that happens is actually one of the biggest actions that you can take. That the empathy is so highly action oriented, because there's all kinds of mental shifts, emotional shifts that are happening in the empathy circle and with empathy, that are just the foundation for any kind of creativity and innovation.
Yeah, so you're responding to what DJ was saying about her desire for action and where does action fit in empathy or empathy circles. And you're saying that you would like to frame listening and empathic reflection as action. You think that's a really important action. And then you also mentioned empathic action, which Mickey, I don't know if you're talking about Mickey Cashtan, but that's where I first heard the
Oh,
term.
okay. Yeah, so there's other ways that could be a whole facet, perhaps a whole workshop on its own, or a session. So, okay, well, I feel fully heard. We've got about 12, 13 minutes here. So next week, I'll try to get that video out, and then we'll go into the session one. It'll probably be like a 30-minute video or so that you can watch beforehand, and then we can discuss it in an empathy circle. So any final any thoughts overall? I've been taking notes. Somebody else has been taking notes. So that's great. I'll put the video online in a page, and kind of make that available so it'll be documented. Maybe we can just go around each person, just any kind of final report. Violetta, you want to start?
I'm gonna keep on the imagining the imaginative empathy then. we'll see where that goes.
And I can also work with you on, I can work with the different groups too, because I'm gonna have a lot of resources and thoughts about it too. Colin?
Yeah, I'm glad I showed up today. I can see some overlap between, for example, the self-empathy and the imaginative empathy. Making connections, just enjoying listening to everyone thinking out loud, feeling more connected to everyone, getting to know people better, and feeling more comfortable now in the group. So yeah, it was a good session for me.
Crystal?
Yeah, I wanted to take a minute, and I can reach out to Violetta privately, but I did just want to share that I think there is a whole world exploding of artificial intelligence that is going to expand our understanding of empathy and how we can bridge it to connect with more people. And just for me, it's been so tied to books. And I would just encourage you in your studies, like if you look at C.S. Lewis or Maya Angelou, people who had traumatic childhoods and didn't receive empathy, but certainly became empaths. And I just want to encourage you in that, as well as the imaginative empathy, because I think that those of us who have suffered as children, that's how we survive those experiences, is through imagination. And so I just want to thank you for that, for reminding me of that. So yeah, and I just enjoyed being present. Thank you.
Thanks. DJ?
So this was great, really great. I like Colin's idea about integrating self into all the different sections, because I have to be honest, I'm pretty confused. Oh, I might lose my electricity in a minute. We're having a huge storm and I just saw it flash. So if I disappear, I probably won't be back. I don't know. I'm really confused because empathy for me has been an internal thing. I haven't really looked at it from another person's point of view. And it's always been about a connection, but it's been about a connection not just to one person, but to these issues that are very global, like hunger and things like this. So I'm really, really confused about the role of self in all of these different models and all of these different modalities or how we're compartmentalizing it. I just really need the self there just so I can get out of the self enough to see what we're really talking about. Because for me, it's a connection. It's not self and other. It could be self and other, but it's the connection between the two. And the other could be the world, and that's the relational component, right? But in the relational component, there's just the self and whatever this other relation is with. So yeah, I like that very much, Colin. I really love it. And now that I understand that the cognitive empathy is the imaginative, I'm much more on board with the whole thing. Now that I see that Edwin's really replaced cognitive with imaginative, then I understand it a lot better. And I think it's really cool. And I love the imagination. Imagination's really, really, really powerful. So go for it, Violetta.
Right. Yeah. So that's exactly that energy you have around imaginative empathy is what I think that we can release. Lou?
Yeah, I'm glad I was here. Really interesting conversation and really interesting opportunity to explore my own thinking about the things that we've discussed. Yeah, I think what more do I want to say? Yeah, I think the question of, what empathy is is a really interesting one, and I think all the different ways of the different strands that we have been discussing and which Edwin identified in the course. I think it's very interesting to explore those the meanings of those different flavors, and not just the meanings, but how they actually function, and what is empathy. And so I am very interested in seeing how that kind of plays out. I do think, related to what DJ said about action, so the idea of empathic action, that there's a lot of ways to be empathic, and one way is to reflect back what someone's saying, and feel with them, and that's a form of empathy. But empathy can also be offered silently. In other words, I don't have to say something, or I could do something. I could take an action, a physical action that is meant to show understanding for what the person is feeling. That's what I understand empathic action to be. But what I hear you saying, DJ, about wanting to problem solve, like wanting to do, like, okay, we understand each other now. What kind of action are we going to take to change a situation, which I would call problem solving? That, in my view, empathy or empathic understanding is a precursor to taking shared action or shared problem solving, and that often conflict persists because people don't understand each other. First, they don't take the step first. They want the action first. They want to solve the problem. And so, yeah, so that was the thought I wanted to express because I was thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I love what we're doing here, because I see what this course does is it creates a sort of a framework, and then everyone can just sort of explore where they are. It's sort of the discussion, the exploration that's the growing aspect of it. So yeah, totally excited about this. I'm gonna get busy, getting back to the editing of that video, and also working on this is just besides the point, with two academics. We're working on an academic study of the empathy circle, doing a 10-week study. I mean, people take part in 10 weeks, and you're all welcome to be participants in the first study that you got to commit to. So that's just another thing. If you don't have enough to do, you can also do that. So, but that's probably not going to start until beginning of next year.
Edwin, do you know what the study question is?
I did want to talk to you about that, because I wanted to run it by you.
Because I think that's really important.
Uh-huh.
What question are you trying to answer with the study? There could be a lot of different ones, and I think, yeah, that's an important question.
So I did want to talk to you about that, because I thought it'd be good to go over it with you at some point. So, okay, I think we're right on schedule. Violetta, do you want to meet later today or tomorrow? I wasn't sure.
I can do today.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Great. All right, then. See you all. Thanks, everyone. See you next
week. Thanks, everybody. Great seeing you.
And if you can't
all the best, everyone.
Do send an email in advance. Just so we know who's going to be there. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.